Hello and welcome to Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. This is Cyrus, and it looks like Bill Nye, the bachelor's degree in science guy, has come out again with what I think is the saddest rebuttal of life after death I have ever seen, not just because of its small mindedness, but because it's just kind of sad in general. It highlights what goes on in people's minds when they close themselves off to any kind of non materialist possibility, a kind of depressing outlook on the world. So, we're going to review this and explain how it's completely wrong. So, a little bit about Bill Nye before we begin. So, Nye, as I mentioned before, does have a bachelor's degree in engineering. So this might come as a shock, but yes, people in Hollywood do create personas to pretend to be people that they're not so that they can become rich and famous. Now, Bill Nye, he did graduate Cornell and he did earn a degree in engineering. It's more than I've done. And he did go on to work a profitable career at Boeing until he, according to his official bio, I kid you not, ended his career at Boeing to pursue a career as a stand-up comedian. And then while he was a stand-up comedian is when people began calling him the science guy, because he basically dabbled in science working at Boeing, engineering new technology. And because of his background before he went into Hollywood, they called him the science guy. But because of his influence, it probably made the right friends. Whatever it may be, he ended up with the TV show Bill Nye the Science Guy, which I watched a lot as a kid. And just like anyone else, I'll say it was a good show. Almost inspired me to become a scientist, and I say almost because ultimately I think it's attitudes like this which made me choose not to pursue science, after all, in a formal or academic fashion, because I would go crazy having to deal with the kind of simple-mindedness that goes on in, well, academia. So after Bill Nye the Science Guy, he made a revival in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. Eventually, maybe 2014, 2015, he came back on the scene with a cringe-inducing Netflix TV show where he attempted to lecture people about social justice issues. But at the end of all this, ultimately what Bill Nye is not is a scientist. What he is an entertainer. And just like other people in the kind of professional skeptic movement, you'll notice that they're not scientists either. For example, Michael Shermer. These are usually philosophers and people good at arguing. That's pretty much their claim to fame, is that they know how to write articles, they know how to argue about things. And so they make themselves into the authorities about anything that's supernatural, so they become the gatekeepers and kind of get all that power. And I sometimes wonder, why is it you don't always see real scientists coming out and condemning a subject like life after death, or UFOs, for example, which are now pretty much mainstream, but there's a few who are still clinging to the old way of thinking about subjects like that, or psychic phenomena. Because I think real scientists, even if they're skeptical about something, they don't think it's real, they don't commit themselves to one thing or another. They basically say, look, show me the evidence, and let's see if we can reproduce it. If we can't reproduce it, then I'm not going to acknowledge it. But they don't become public figures advocating against the existence of something, because this is truly non-scientific behavior. So you can tell right away when you have non-scientists feeding off of, leeching off of scientific establishment, because they are advocating against something instead of going about things the scientific way, which is leaving all possibilities open. So, speaking of Shermer, Bill Nye was with Shermer on a panel, which also included Michio Kaku, and I'd be interested in hearing what he had to say about this. I haven't seen this panel. I'm not sure if I could really suffer through it, but on this panel, he made the following statements about life after death. And before we look at those, you are watching Afterlife Topics. You probably know what our position here is about these types of things. If you like this type of thing, go down, hit that subscribe button. You can also consider becoming a patron. It's the absolute best possible way to support this channel and the work that I do and the books I write, the community, and all of this is by becoming a patron. It would help an incredible amount. You can do so at patreon.com/afterlife topics. Okay, so back to the article. So this is where we get to the saddest interpretation I've seen of the status critical interpretation I've seen of the afterlife. According to Mr. Nye, most people imagine life after death involving our spirits taking on an idealized version of ourselves from our past. However, Mr. Nye argued this is highly improbable because most people tend to die at an old age, making it unusual for the spirit to not resemble us at the moment of our death. Apparently, he knows something about something very complex about metaphysics. I think maybe he was watching The Sixth Sense, and he thinks that when you die, you are automatically going to look like and be in whatever form your physical body was in. Although I don't even think The Sixth Sense took things that far, but it does seem like that is where he's getting his information. He said, "Everybody is going to die. I've never met anyone who is not going to die." I mean, okay. What does this have to do with anything? I mean, we all know we're all going to die. We're talking about an afterlife. We're not talking about mortality. I mean, mortality is the given. The question is, what goes on with consciousness after the physical body ends? He says, "I have never met anyone who is of a certain age who's not already dead. It sucks." Kind of almost sounds like a child talking, doesn't it? "I've never met anyone who's of a certain age who's not already dead." Yeah, okay. Like, I've never met a 110-year-old either. I think there's a few of them out there. I have not gone out of my way to meet a 110-year-old. Again, yeah, we know this. I mean, it's almost like, I mean, he's 65 years old. He's realizing that he is mortal. A lot of us don't make it past 85 or 95. He knows that there's not that much time left. And I get that's a lot of pressure. But you know, you can think about these ideas from a slightly more expanded vantage point. Is all I'm saying. Yeah, I know that you don't meet people past a certain age. That has nothing to do with the afterlife. It's a non-materialist concept. He goes on. "Now here is the evidence for why I don't believe in an afterlife." And it's wonderful what the definition of evidence apparently is now, according to Bill Nye. Because the pseudo-skeptics always rag on our peer-reviewed studies, our clinical research into NDEs and OBEs, our research into reincarnation, after-death contacts, apparitions, and a zillion other subjects, and say, "Oh, that's not evidence. Oh, there's never been any evidence of an afterlife." You know, they're the same, they're the cult of the materialist, which we've talked about on this show. So the materialist cult loves to change the bar about what evidence is. But now Bill Nye is going to spout off some pseudo-philosophy, and he's going to say that this is evidence. And so let's read on. Obviously, without understanding the first thing about the afterlife as it's actually discussed and researched. He says, "It would be terrific if you carry on living in the same physical state he was in when he was 23 years old, but this is not the case as the body ages and loses its capabilities with time, you don't say." As an example, Mr. Nye said his grandmother was brilliant, but did not stay that way and instead faded away with age. He said, "People my age have a lot of grandparents and parents who are not as sharp, certainly not as athletically capable or physically capable as they were when they were younger, And so watching ourselves die is, to me, overwhelming evidence that there is no life after death. There is certainly no it doesn't seem to be any reason to think that when you die, you go back to your optimum age, at your optimum athletic ability, and your optimum intellectual sharpness. Mr. Nye added, evolution, if it were an entity, doesn't care about you, man. So this is really just such a sad series of statements to make, because first it shows a complete intellectual block. So we're talking about other dimensions of reality. And certainly, people like myself, I've had experiences of being in a physical body on the other side. And I've spoken to people on the other side in physical bodies. But there's some people who, for better or worse, believe that we don't even have a physical body. You can become a consciousness blip floating around. And that's a respectable belief compared to what Nye is saying. So Nye has no mental comprehension of non-materialism, that when you try to introduce this subject, it's like he can't even fit it through those narrow confines, those narrow parameters of his mind. So it just stops him right there. So obviously the afterlife is a subject concerning multi-dimensionality, different levels of existence, things outside of this spectrum, dark matter, if you will, if you want to go into the specifics of some kind of a physical paradigm we can wrap our minds around. But this way of thinking is so alien to him that when he thinks of life after death, he's thinking about it in literal terms of someone's physical condition not ending when they die. That's literally what he's saying. So he misunderstands the subject so much that he thinks we're talking about someone living to 200 years old and not telling anyone. He thinks that the afterlife is this world. Right? And that to me is so shocking and bizarre to me, because I truly believe, at a 12-year-old, I was a 12, can comprehend the idea of another dimension, or we're in a body right now and being able to do something that's not in the brain, that's not in the body, or being outside of or more than your body, right? So that is just the metaphysics 101. And if you're going to dabble in this area, you should at the very least play devil's advocate and think about the subject from that perspective, from a metaphysical perspective. And Bill Nye has shown he's not able to do that. And he also ends things with this very sad kind of nihilism, fatalism. He says, evolution, if it were an entity, doesn't really care about you, man. And again, this is that kind of edgelord, new atheist way of speaking, which is that, it's a cold, cruel universe. Anyone who studies things which indicates, for example, we're more than our bodies or we're more than evolution is just deluding themselves, because they're afraid of the cold, cruel, thoughtless, unintelligent universe, right? So this is the Dawkins selfish gene way of thinking. And I'll tell you one thing is that it takes absolute zero bravery to, number one, pretend to be a scientist, pretend to be part of academia, pretend all those credentials, and then you actually do achieve it. So he's gotten his honorary doctorates for having a TV show. But to be part of the mainstream, and then to basically just support the mainstream positions. So it takes no courage. Mikio Kaku is a good example of somebody who has courage, and I don't know what his positions are on the afterlife, but I've heard his positions on extraterrestrials and things like that. I saw him speaking at a UFO conference I went to in Spain a couple of years back, and there is someone with integrity and courage, because it takes courage to come out of this very academia, which is obviously it's very simple-minded, and decide to go against the grain, to support the things which are taboo to support. To become a public figure in academia and in science, like Bill Nye or Neil Tyson, and to make your platform known for just reinforcing all the stuff that academia agrees with you about, again, that takes no courage. It's the easiest path to play, and it's played also because it's choosing the safest possible option to guarantee a career and to guarantee that you'll stay on the good side. Now, somebody like Kaku, a real scientist, he's also not afraid to push boundaries because he knows that that's where progress is made in boundaries. And again, I didn't see what Kaku had to say in response. It's doubtful that Kaku took like a strong stance and said, "Oh, there is an afterlife," but I'm willing to bet Kaku was introducing the multi-dimensionality element into all of this because that's what Kaku does. So again, it shows an incredible amount of simple-mindedness on the part of Bill Nye, and it is non-scientific thinking. It's, instead of pushing boundaries, expanding into wider possibilities, it's shrinking down into what society wants you to say, what the establishment wants you to say. And the black pill version of Cyrus actually gets a little bit cynical about this and begins to wonder if people like Bill Nye are the representations of Earthlings, of the human race, and this is how people think, this is how people want to continue this narrative that maybe humans don't deserve to know. Maybe humans deserve to be in misery about death and dying, deserve to see existence as this cold, thoughtless process, and to not be aware of the afterlife, and to again live in misery. Maybe humans are really that small-minded. Maybe it's just what everybody deserves. Now, I think society will be a lot brighter if the many 40 plus areas of objective evidence of an afterlife were mainstream knowledge, and I'm going to keep fighting for that to be a reality. But then sometimes the black-pilled version of me just looks at it and thinks, this whole society has failed to demonstrate that it's even capable of thinking in an expanded way. So, of course, express.co.uk also drops the ball in this article with their little opinion paragraphs stating the jury is still out on whether life goes on after death, even though most of the world's religions claim to know the answer. I don't care about religions. I care about the concrete evidence, which these people don't care about. Scientifically, there is very little evidence of the human spirit carrying on after the body is gone, and yet some people claim to have caught a glimpse of the afterlife, having gone through so-called near-death experiences, NDEs. In fact, there is quite a bit of scientific evidence. There's quite a bit of literature surrounding this topic, not just NDEs. And then they plug in that NDEs are basically influence from patients' cultural norms, which doesn't actually disprove them as an afterlife phenomena at all, and so forth and so on. So it's more of the same stuff, the same just inability for humanity to progress in this area. And it is, it's sad on multiple levels, because also, think about how many normies, they absorb this stuff like a sponge. And the simple-mindedness, it's always been a problem here in the USA, and it can swing both ways. It's like, when people present afterlife information, they interpret it through simple-mindedness, and then they sometimes cling to the worst possible interpretation. So you get like the most ridiculous NDEs, or the very, very religious-y people pushing religious narratives, or some of the new agey stuff that I criticize on this channel as well. But then, of course, then the simple-mindedness can switch to the skeptical side, where it's just complete inability to process anything that doesn't exist within the materialism box. So I guess I'm just a little bit frustrated, I do think it's time for aliens to land, or something to happen to just knock us upside our heads. All right, well, what can you do about this? Not too surprising. Again, if you want to just, very easy to refute what Bill Nye is saying, check out, I don't know, Victor Zamet's book, victorzamet.com. He has 40 plus or so areas of afterlife evidence. It was one of my first areas of information about this subject when I was like a teenager, when I first read Victor Zamet's book. That's still online. It's on, it's for free on victorzamet.com. Many areas of evidence which none of these people would have any clue about. You don't hear them talking about Ian Stevenson's research. You don't hear them talking about like the Skoll report or even things like that. Express authors, Bill Nye, obviously Shermer, who's spending as much time as possible in his mortal existence as a shill. Like these guys, they, it's very predictable, unfortunately. All right. Well, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. You can get involved, of course, at Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics on Facebook. There's a little MeWe community we have going on. There's the Reddit Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics community. This channel, of course, and anywhere else. So the afterlifetopics.com, different places that this community has branched out into. So you can check all this out, or check out books of mine where I go over the actual evidence that these guys don't know anything about. Understanding Life After Death and the Afterlife and Beyond on Amazon. All right, that's it for this video. I'll catch you guys next time.